Thank you, amigo. And thank you I'm so humbled to be here. It's pretty rare that I'm feeling like I'm feeling now. In 2008, I was a young grower. I had, more than almost 10 years under my belt of farming on small scale, and started my farm. And with my wife, who's on the picture there, Modelaine. She's in Africa now, teaching some of the practice that we do on our farm to growers there now, with my young girl, Rose. And I came here in 2008, not really knowing what EcoFarm was about. And it just exploded my mind. Like, I came to this conference, and I saw a community of people, not just farmers, but other people around, supporting, helping, creating, designing, making organic happen. And I saw this place, which is so beautiful, and I was thinking, wow, this is how farmers should be treated. This place is good enough for us. And I was young back then, and it just kind of inspired me to realize how we're on a trajectory, and there's been people before us, before me, before my generation, before my siblings, my peers, that have paved the way for us to be successful farmers. And I'd like to dedicate anything that I do, my work, my book, to the pioneers that have been there before us, because it's really them that have allowed us to be successful today. And when I came here in 2008, my highlight of the trip, and I still talk about it today, my crew's here today, and I've told them, was the eulogy where we celebrate the passing away of the pioneers and the people that have been there before us, which we attended this morning. I just can't tell you enough how I feel that's so important to recognize the role of elders and people before us who are paving the way. And so, just want to say that. And because I'm somewhat entrepreneurial, I've always felt like, oh man, I wish I would be invited here. So for the last 10 years, I've been writing in my black book all of my goals. I start my year by writing my goals, yearly goals, and then my monthly goals, and then my weekly goals. I'm really a goal setter. And one of the goals that's always been there through the years was being invited to EcoFarm to talk. Well, it's finally happening today, so I'm really happy about that. A short story today is the story of my farm and how it came to be and what it is and why it's important, I think, especially in the context of this generation of new young farmers that are out there that want to make an impact and that are looking up to models and ways that they get into farming. And I think that our story and our farm mall offers that opportunity. So I'll talk about that just a bit later on. But I started farming because I was interested in saving the world. I didn't grow up on a farm. I knew nothing about farming when I got into it. I was traveling in Mexico with my wife. We were doing fair trade coffee things. We were working on farms there, learned Spanish, learned about those communities down there. Then we went to New Mexico. And that was my first time spending any time in the US, and we were in Santa Fe, which is an amazing community of super enlightened people, and there was an awesome farmers market there with about 35 growers selling every week to a whole community of people that were not only supporting and buying, but they were praising the farmers. Farmers were rock stars and important people in that community. And we were lucky enough to find this person that was from Quebec, Richard Bélanger from Gaspésie, and he was farming there, and he was the salad king of Santa Fe. And boy, did we connect with Richard. And we started to woof on his farm, and that's where we discovered the lifestyle that has been mine ever since. And what inspired me so much from my first weeks and my first months and my first year with Richard was not his teaching about how to do things, was the fact that we were outside and we were doing applied ecology every day. We were growing stuff, and then we were bringing it to market, and then there was no pattern where all of this goes to, you know, externalities, or it was just kind of direct. You create something, and then you market it, and then you sell it, and then somebody thanks you for it. And I just thought that was so powerful. So we were outside. It was beautiful. His farm was in Abiquiu, where Georgia O'Keeffe, the famous American painter, used to paint. So it was a really beautiful setup. And again, we would be at the booth, and then people would line up to get their greens for the week. And then, you know, people would thank Richard, and I was like, wow, this is awesome. And then I would see how much cash he would make in one morning. I was like, fudge, this is awesome. You make $3,000 in one morning. And that was my first introduction to farming. So very positive, bright and sunny. You make money, and people are calling you a hero. And I was like, wow, this is awesome. Why would I want to do anything else? And that's how I got into farming. And we stayed 2 years there, and then we came back to Quebec, to our community, to our roots, and we started a market garden there. And funny story, there was a couple there, Ben and Christina. They were living with their 2 kids in a teepee, and they were bringing their food, their produce at farmers market. Their booth was not far from ours, and we thought, yeah, that's the way to do it. So we came back to Quebec and set up a teepee and lived there for 2 years. Believe me, Quebec and Santa Fe are 2 different climates, and we learned a lot of things the hard way. But we were super motivated, and kind of fast forward 10 years later, I'll show you pictures. We went from a teepee farm, farming on 1/3 of an acre, to a major upgrade. We bought a rabbit barn and built a house inside that barn. And for many, many years, it would rain outside, and I was like, wow, water is not getting into the house. I just felt it was wonderful. And we started a market garden, and it's a really well-designed market garden. And we quickly found customers for our CSA. We started with 50 CSA. We went to 100 and 150, and then there was a farmer's market, and we added another farmer's market and started to sell greens at the local grocery store. And in our first year, we were making $80,000, and then the second year, we broke $100,000, and we went to 130, and it just kept climbing. But we were always farming the same piece of land, which is about 2-acre property. And we developed all sorts of techniques and strategies, and I won't go in details with all of this today, but all of this was designed around the fact that we didn't have any more space. So we concentrated things, and we were lucky because there was a lot of pioneers before us, like Elliot Coleman, who was showing us through his teaching, to his books, how to do this, and we were really, eager to figure it out. And our farm became quite successful in its 3rd year, with the cash flow and paying up the debt and making it so that we could have enough money to travel in the winter, because it's minus 20 at this point in time. So this is why this is so awesome for me, because it's minus 20 back home. And for the last 15 plus years, we've been able to live in the countryside, homestead, raise our kids on that farm. We are important community members in our community because we're food suppliers of fresh, healthy foods. We have those people, these customers that we all know by their names because we've been their family farmers for 10 plus years. A lot of them have come to us many times, not only to thank us, but to say that we're included in their daily prayers when they get their food at night, thanking our family for the work. I just feel that that's so powerful when somebody tells you that they're in their home and they're thinking about you before they eat. We've had the chance to travel. We've had the chance to teach a lot of young people how to do this. It's just been an amazing blessing, this farm and this farm life. And from early on, I thought, this is too good to be kept And that's why I've been excited and passionate about sharing this and hopefully inspiring others that you can make a living farming on small acreage. And it's a beautiful life, and it's an amazing lifestyle. So this is an aerial picture of my farm. It's very, very, very small. To go all around it takes about 4 minutes. Okay? So it looks hot like this when a drone shot, but it's actually a super small farm. And there's a lot of different designs that are important. We work on permanent raised beds. Everything is organized in field blocks with rotations. And we do a lot of successions. We do up to 3 successions in our northern climate in Quebec. If we were growing here in California, I think we'd have 6 or 7 successions on each beds. But the farm is beautiful. It's where we live. There's no tractor, and I'll talk about that. We're listening to birds. We're outside. We're growing stuff, and we're selling to people that are excited about our work. So it's just been so beautiful, and I feel very humbled by it. So these are the numbers of my farm, because ever since I've started to talk about this, I felt that, yes, showing pictures of happy farmer is important, and that we look healthy and all, that's fine. But the economics are so important, and unfortunately, we rarely talk about it. It's very uncommon for a farmer to say, yes, my annual sales are X, and my net returns are Y. But when we're in the business world, these numbers are important, but that's how we can relate to one another in terms of understanding cropping practices. And so from the get-go, I've always been kind of transparent about our numbers, because I also think that they show that there's a different pattern when you're not aiming to scale out and look at margins in terms of having high volumes. When you look at it reversely and you're saying we want to direct sell everything, we want to keep the full income from that sale to the farm, we want to keep labor to a minimum because that's a big expenditure, and we want us to work on that farm. And we work with low-tech tools, and there's not a lot of investment that went into the farm, and then you can get a good return. So the sales have been more than $100,000 per acre for 10 plus years. And the crew is it's a 4-man operation. It used to be me and my wife with 2 others. Now she runs it without me, and she says it's better this way. On my farm, I used to always buy new tools and try stuff and do experiments and do all of that. And a lot of the management strategies that are working were because I was trialing a lot of things. But she keeps it simple, and she makes it happen, and she's awesome. Anyway, so no tractor and not a lot of fossil fuel to run that operation, which I rarely talk about, but it's pretty cool. It's not because we don't want to use fuel, it's just because we don't need it. To run my BCS on a full year costs me about, $260 is all the fuel that I'll put in my engine that runs the whole farm. And that's about 10 times less money than the parking tickets that I get when I go deliver to Montreal. So it's definitely not a lot. And through all of the things that I've been explaining, and I'm still doing today, the profit margins are also very important. So, perhaps the sales of a small farm like that are not skyrocket, but the margins are very interesting, enough to sustain a family and an income. And, we are living proof of that. And now a lot of other people are showing that this is possible. And we're not talking about the small farm dream. We're talking about the small farm business. It's very different. This is a business, and we run it as a business, but we're having a lot of fun doing it. Okay? I want to talk just a little bit about tractors, why we don't use them, and it's a very important point in our system. Not that we have anything against tractors. I think they're awesome, but it's just sometimes most of the farms that I visit, and I visited a lot of farms all around Europe and all across the US and Canada and Australia and New Zealand, whatever, everything revolves around the tractor. And I find it very bizarre because tractors, were invented about 100 years ago. And And now we can't even imagine farming systems without tractors. But if you travel to Asia, if you go to other places, tractors are not mandatory for production. They're one of the tools in your toolbox. And what I had observed on most of the farms that I was visiting, especially when I was younger, was that not only did everything revolve around the tractor, but the whole layout, the pattern, the grid, the way things are laid out into the fields was decided according to the tractor. So the spacings between the rows and the crops get determined by your weeding implement. And when you leave out the tractor and we work on a 30-inch permanent bed system where we don't need to be hilling, shaping, making new beds every year because the beds are permanent. It's more of a gardening kind of strategy. But the crops are really densely spaced. And then you get, 5 times more production in the same space. And you have a lot of efficiencies that are built in because of that. You get the crops that shade out the weeds, and then they retain the moisture, so you need to water a lot less. And you have just more production and more efficiencies that way. I always give the example that if I'm planting 5 times closer and I'm using row cover, so that means I'm using 5 times less row cover or insect net to cover the same amount of crops, which ends up costing me 5 times less money, but I'm also doing it 5 times faster. So there's a very important efficiency there. So we always think that zooming down with the tractor is, makes you go fast, but then there's all sorts of things that makes you go scaling out, and then you have more land to manage. It's harder to scout for disease and insects and all of that. And mind you, I'm talking about no tractors on small farms, not on, million-dollar farms. I'm talking about farms that are doing 100, 200, 300 CSA members or a couple of farmers market. Perhaps the tractor is just not the most appropriate tool when you're farming 5 acres, okay? So this is another important piece of our puzzle, was the design of the farm. I think that not that many farmers understand how they're embedded in a design on their own farm. Okay, so we're here in this room, and there's lighting, there's a stage. It was designed for what we're doing, so it feels good. But most farms, they're just randomly developed, or you purchase a farm that's been kind of developed by somebody else. And it's very important, I think, to understand from a bird's eye view how everything connects. And the number one downtime on a farm is the walking distance going from field to field. Because when you have a crew or 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 30 people walking down to a crew, or taking 10 minutes to go from one block to the other, well, that's a lot of downtime in a day. And on our farm, the pattern is that all the beds are put in field blocks surrounding the warehouse. And so wherever we are on the farm, we're about 2 minutes walk coming back and forth. There's all sorts of other things that I could say, but I feel strongly that if we're going to be successful, especially for young people starting out, you need to understand your farm from a bird's eye view, and you need to make sure that you have a good design from the get-go. And permaculture teaches us that. So that's one good tool that's out there that can help us understand better farming practices. In my farm also, the crop rotation, which allows our fertility and production to be sustainable for 15 plus years, growing the same crops year after year on a small piece of land, doing a lot of succession, is that we have a built-in crop rotation that I won't go into details today, but it's built into the design of the farm, where each field block is a botanical family rotating counterclockwise. And so there's 4 years between alliums, 4 years between nightshades, whatever. But these are the things that, because we had a limited amount of space from the get-go, we needed to establish and to make sure that we weren't going to run out of fertility or have a lot of buildup and disease pressure over the years. So I won't go into all the details of our farming system, but it's just, I think people underestimate how a few 100-foot beds of really closely, densely seeded or transplanted crop ends up being a lot of production. So feeding 200, 300 families, and them having you as their family farmer paying directly, if you do the math, You know, if you provide food for them for 30, 40, or 50 weeks out of the year, and it works, okay? The economics can work if you look at them from another perspective than margins and the fact that you're scaling up, okay? Some of the keys, successful keys that I've pointed out over the years with my farm was that we've always focused on growing better, not bigger. Because one of the big things that I see is people have access to a lot of land. And they're like, well, I have 5 acres, I'm gonna farm it. And I'm like, well, we have, 1.5, and it's providing 4 people full-time job, and you're gonna grow 5? How's that gonna work out? And that's, I think, one of the strategies that have helped us. Because we've been land limited, it forced us to look at ways to optimize instead of just kind of spreading out. So land constraint on our farm was our biggest mentor. I've learned so much from the land constraint that we had. All of the things, the management strategies came about because of that constraint, forcing us to look at production in a different way. We've left out the tractor, and I've talked about this, and we've really focused more on plants and soil. I'd like to come here perhaps again and talk about living soils and how we work with living soils and how we rely on the earthworms and how we foster them and how we have all these management strategies that are very gentle with the soil ecology, because we're definitely trying to replace mechanical tillage with biological tillage and have the natural forces work for us. And that's been a big key to our success. We're also focusing a lot on, again, perspective, different point of views. Instead of going for weed control, so I go to a lot of trade shows, and then all the growers are lining up to see all the tools, the mechanized tools, and you need a tine weeder, you need a harrow, you need this, you need that, you need this. But nobody really focuses on how to prevent weed from the get-go, okay? So how, having compost that is well-turned, simple, how not putting straw that has weeds, how not turning your soil because you're bringing weed seeds from the bottom up, how having close spacings will make it so that you don't have bare exposed soil. So all of these strategies are more strategies that help you prevent the problem in the first place. So that's been huge for us, and I'm a big proponent of that. Initial farm design, talked about this. Investment, when we started our farm, we didn't have a lot of cash, and we didn't want to go to debt, but we borrowed some. We borrowed $40,000, and we made it happen with that, buying a simple tool shed, and it has worked really well for us. And I think that when we're concerned about young people getting into farming, we should really make an effort, especially the growers that are more advanced in their career, to realize that, when we built a farm, when we built a business, there's steps, and you grow your farm as you feel more comfortable, you make an investment, you grow your farm, things happen, you find a new market, you develop clientele and relationships, and it's hard to ask young people to start at that level, because they need to make their own experiments, they need to make their own mistakes and have their own learning. So the whole strategy of presenting a model where you can start small and be successful and make a profit is, I think, really relevant in today's world, where we're really actively wanting to have more young people getting into farming. So I wouldn't go as far as to say that small 5-acre less farms is the way, the solution to feed the world, because I don't believe in that. I would rather say perhaps to feed the community, which in my mind is a lot more relevant. But I'm just trying to push the message here that if we don't give more importance to very small farms, it's going to be hard for these young farmers to become, perhaps at one point, farmers that have bigger farms, because they need to have the proper training to get there. So that's why my message about small-scale farming. If we're really serious about changing the food system, the key factor, I think, is to have more young people interested into farming. Okay? So I have 1 minute left. Please wrap up. My book, everything that I do is in my book, The Market Gardener, and it's been really incredible. I just want to tell you that I wrote this book in French, and I had absolutely no idea of the impact that it would have. And it's now translated into 6 languages. It's sold all over the world. And it's a technical book about how to successfully start a farm. And for me, what it shows is that there's a groundswell happening right now, and there's a lot of young people that want to start farming. So let's make it happen for them. All right? Thank you.